Awesome. Okay. So, let's get going. Today we're going to talk about how to partition your trigger logic using metadata. Say that 3 times fast. And let's go. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here are your developer user group leaders. There's myself. I'm Melissa Shook. I am a senior Salesforce administrator at a company called Easy Texting. I've been there for 1.5 years, and I've been Salesforce administrator / developer for 7 years. So I love Salesforce. Next, we have Nadina. Nadina, let you introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Melissa. My name is Nadina Lisbon. I'm a Salesforce technical architect for Tradeshift. Been in the ecosystem for a very long time, about 6-7 years. Love everything development, but recently moved into that architect role. Welcome, everyone.
And Justin.
Hey, everybody. My name is Justin Lisbon. I'm a Salesforce technical architect at Turnkey Vacation Rentals. I've been doing Salesforce for 8, going on 9 years now, I think. And yeah, this should be a good topic tonight.
And then Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Fivecoat, and I am a senior Salesforce architect at Silicon Labs based in Austin. And I've been in the ecosystem for 5 years.
Awesome. All right, thank you. All right, next, just a little slide on meeting expectations. It is expected that all attendees treat each other with respect. This meeting is a safe space for everyone in the Salesforce Ohana. And that's just how we roll here. Okay, so we're gonna start just, being that we are a Texas-based user group, even though we haven't met in person in about a year, we will again. And so we especially wanted to, acknowledge the tragic circumstances for many people that happened over the past week with the winter storm Uri, not sure how. And so we have some money set aside this month to help the community here in Austin or Texas in general, for anyone who needs some extra money to go toward buying food or supplies that were affected by the storm conditions. So just email us at austin-text-devs@trailblazercgl.com. And we will hook up with some resources and use some of that money that Salesforce gives us in our budget to help people in need this month. Also, we just wanted to give you all a link to the Central Texas Food Bank right here, and I think Nadina will probably put that link in the chat as well, so people can easily just click on it if they want to. This is where we would suggest people making donations if they're interested. It's like, I mean, honestly, as we all know, with the pandemic as well, this food scarcity is an issue that is really gotten worse for many more and more people need help. So this is a great resource to go to for that. Now, no, sorry. I skipped this one. This is the one I skipped, sorry. Okay, so we won't be having any March meeting. We're taking a break for March. We're working on the April event, so keep an eye out. We post on Twitter, we post in our community, we post to the user list that we have from where you signed up for this one. We'll be posting. If you're signed up for that, you'll see the next email when we get April finalized. And we're also always we're really looking for more people to want to present. So if you have any presentation that you're interested in, this is a great group to practice with. Not that we're, I mean, you should practice at least once on your own before you try to do it to the whole group. But then, we're not, you're not at Dreamforce yet with us. We're a local group, and we're very. I don't know. If you ever get to meet us in person when we're back in person again, you'll know how we just have the energy. We just want to help each other do better and be better. And so presenting with us, I feel like, is one of the best places to learn how to present and get feedback that is good, and to not have to worry about feeling like, you're going to mess up, and just do it. So reach out if you have any ideas on something you want to present in the future, and we'd love to work with you on that. And we can even do smaller presentations. If we get a bunch of people who want to do like 20 minutes instead of like a full 45-minute, we could do a couple instead of, one per meeting or something like that. So there's different things we might think of doing. All right, and now we're going to, before we start, we have something I've forgotten in some meetings, which is we like to ask the group, two questions. And the first question is anyone here looking for work? Is anyone here, looking for a job? And if you are, just unmute yourself and introduce yourself and tell us, just like, hey, I'm looking for this kind of job.
What's up, guys? Yeah, I'm still looking. I think I was here the last month one. I'm Renee, by the way. But yeah, still looking. Signed up for a mentor on for Salesforce, and he's definitely been helping. I'm actually doing a presentation on one of his meetups, so that's good. Then just trying to work on some additional skills, some additional badges. Actually went to Pat's Sunday super badge meetup, which was cool. But yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, Renee, are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn. Renee Molinari.
All right. Before we sign out, let's talk real quick, and I'll get your info. I'll pass it along to somebody.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
That's Mark Gaither, by the way, that was talking.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Yep. I'm actually right now, as you were speaking, I was trying to minimize the big screen so I could see who was talking in particular. All right, Mark. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep. I'll put myself
Hey,
in
this
the
is
chat there.
Pat. I wanted to let you guys know about it's not a dev position, but it's a senior admin position based at one of my clients is looking to hire. They're based in just north of LA in Encino, California. And I just posted in the chat a link. They're all remote now. They're hoping to get back in the office, obviously, after quarantine, and would love to have someone in that area. But if you're a perfect fit, they might make an exception for you. So just check out that link in the chat.
Well, that leads into, thank you, Pat. That leads to my next question, which was anyone who is hiring. And so Pat knows of some place that's hiring. Is anyone else hiring? I will start. A friend of mine works at a company called Thousand Eyes. He is the senior Salesforce administrator there, and they are hiring for a Salesforce developer position. And so he asked if I would put this out there. So I will post it to the community, and it is remote. So I don't know if that means you can live anywhere, but it definitely means you don't have to move. It's one of those things I just recently learned about, right? That just because you're remote doesn't mean you can live anywhere, because sometimes it depends on the state, if they have like tax licenses and all that. But I know that they have licenses in Texas, that much I do know. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Anyone else who is hiring? Cool. Okay. Well, with that being said, I would like to introduce Mitch. And so Mitch is currently an application engineer at Google. And he has over 7 years of experience delivering solutions on Salesforce.com. His experience includes application development, architectural design, and test planning execution. He currently holds 16 active Salesforce certification, which is a lot, including application and system architect. So welcome, Mitch, and I'm going to let you take over.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Melissa. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's share this screen. Desktop 3. Share. All right, let me know when you can see it. Should be like a Google Slides presentation.
Yeah, I can see. Well, I can see your screen. I can't see the presentation yet.
Interesting. Maybe I selected the wrong screen. I think I did that. Hold on one sec. Desktop 3. Now?
Yes.
All right, cool. Let's go to present. Cool. So just like Melissa said, my name is Mitch Spano. I'm an application engineer at Google, and here we're going to be learning, we're going to be discussing something that I'm really, really excited to share, and that's how we can partition our trigger logic using custom metadata. Before the meeting started, there was a little bit of back and forth about, you know, hey, we've got this trigger, it needs to be refactored. There's multiple people touching it. Those are exactly the problems that this framework is meant to solve. So just in case I happen to say anything that's not available on the platform, if you happen to be making a purchasing decision, do it based on what's currently available. We're all developers here. We're probably not buying licenses ourselves anyway, but just in case. I got me and all my friends up here. So it's just gonna be me going through this framework with you guys today. And like I said, I'm super excited to share this with you. So it's some things you might want to take out of this discussion, right? If you're an architect, I want you to consider, like, how could you use this framework, migrate to this framework, and then use it in order to make your organization scale, especially thinking about multiple teams. If you're a developer, I want you to think about how this can help you to write your code in isolation, and definitely take a look at, definitely keep your eyes peeled for when we go over unit testing within this framework. There's a lot of great stuff within there. And then if you're just a manager or maybe an administrator who's looking to become a developer, this presentation might help you understand some of the complexities of working in a trigger and some things that even experienced, seasoned veterans who are like architecturally sound, there are some complications that come with writing triggers. So this might give you a little bit more of a better sense of what it actually involves when somebody says we need to write some trigger logic to do this. Cool. So Apex triggers, right? In the world of Salesforce, we have multiple tools at our fingertips in terms of process automation. So when records get saved to the database, we can use workflow to update fields. We could send emails. We could use Process Builder to do a little bit more advanced workflow type of things. We could do some flow, which is like, there's been a lot of recent investments in flow. So flow is becoming a very, very applicable tool within the Salesforce ecosystem. And then at the very top, there's triggers, at least for right now. So Apex triggers are the most powerful way, but they're also the riskiest because they always run, and they're difficult to maintain because they're code and all of the logic needs to reside basically in one file.
That slide is awesome, by the way.
Thank you. So trigger logic, like I said, it can get messy, right? So basically you say we're after insert on opportunity, right? And then you need to determine based on the fields that have changed or based on what context you're in, what kind of actions you want to take. So if we're after insert and the record type is wholesale, then maybe we'll update the related account, or maybe we'll send the notification to the EMEA sales team or whomever it may be. But managing all of this stuff within the body of one class can get very, very complicated. So last time that we got together, we talked about trigger frameworks at different levels of maturity. And the top level of maturity, we called that level 3. And that is the kind of de facto Kevin O'Hara trigger framework that is used widely in the ecosystem. And that's the most applicable one. But basically all of the existing trigger frameworks have this similar problem. So they'll basically allow you the opportunity to define a method called before update or whatever it is on a class, and then you add your logic within the scope of that method, right? So even if you do this perfectly, where you just write a one-liner that passes your trigger new to a private method and completely are very, very strict about the actions that you're taking and the order in which you're taking them, every single time you need to come back into the trigger handler and modify it, right? So eventually your trigger handler just gets longer and longer and longer and more unmaintainable as time goes on. And then, if you're working in a multiple team environment, especially if you have a complicated sales or service cloud implementation where you got a lot of automation on the case S object or on the opportunity S object, like this gets really, really hairy really fast. So that is, there are some other things about the frameworks too that are a little bit less than ideal. For example, if I wanted to test this, I'd actually need to insert an opportunity to test all the logic for this in order to cover that apex within the test class itself. So even the best implementation, if you walked into an org, if you were just brand new on a project and you looked at their trigger and it looked like this, you should applaud the team that gave this to you, because this is very, very well architected. You can tell that the pattern has been followed, but there's still opportunities to improve, right? And that's where I want to introduce what I'm calling the trigger actions framework. So the idea about the trigger actions framework is, in the past, we've just used classes to define kind of like an abstract or a virtual class, and then extend that class as what we call like opportunity trigger handler or case trigger handler or whatever it may be. The idea here is, here's the link to the project and the a little QR code, so that way you could just save a screenshot and take a look at the project later if you want to. And we'll be going back and forth between the GitHub repository and Salesforce and Visual Studio Code throughout the rest of this presentation. But the idea here for the metadata, for the trigger actions framework is, why don't we use more than just classes? We'll also use metadata to help us determine the order of execution and partition our trigger logic in ways that we have never before have been possible. So here's the class diagram, right? We basically have the trigger base, the metadata trigger handler, and the trigger action. And I don't want you to worry about this. The whole point of this framework is this exists and you don't need to touch it at all. There's also these two different types of metadata. There's the S object trigger setting and the trigger action itself. The idea is all of this stays the same. And then whenever you have a new action that you want to take, you simply write an individual class which implements the correct interface. Then you use custom metadata to make sure that those actions that you authored are ordered in the correct context. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to get out of this presentation. I've got a Scratch org here. And what I've done is I've installed the trigger framework from the GitHub repository. And then I've also added a few classes, right? So these are just some implementations. I added a trigger, I added a constants class, and then I added a class that makes sure that the opportunity is inserted in prospecting, and then another class that makes sure that the opportunity doesn't move out of order when you traverse the stages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Salesforce. I'm going to go to custom metadata types, and I'm going to create a record of the S object trigger setting. So let's create a new one. And this just basically corresponds to your S object type. So I'm going to say opportunity. Oops. The object API name is opportunity, and I'm going to save that. Okay, so now this means that the metadata trigger framework is enabled on the opportunity S object. If you take a look at the opportunity trigger that we wrote, it's just a one-liner. All that we do is new metadata trigger handler .run. So the idea is you install the trigger actions framework, you write this one-liner trigger, you configure the S object trigger setting itself, then you can write your actions and use custom metadata to define the order in which they execute. So I'm going to go to custom metadata types. I'm going to go to trigger action, and I'll press manage records, and I'll create a new one. Now let's create the new one for the stage insert rules. So I grab the name of the class and I say, okay, here's the opportunity stage insert rules, right? It's going to be the first thing that happens before insert on opportunity, right? So this right here is a metadata lookup to that S-object trigger setting. If I try to save this, it'll say, wait a sec, you need to enter a description. So no longer can your developers just write code without telling other people what it does, right? So this prevents the opportunity, whoops, from being inserted if the stage name is, if the stage is not prospecting. So I'm going to save this. All right, great. So let's take a look at the actual class itself. It's pretty small. All that we do in order to author a new trigger action is we write an individual class and we just say which context does it actually run in. We do that by implementing the correct interface. So all that we're doing here is before insert, for every opportunity that's new, if the opportunity stage does not equal prospecting, we're going to add this error to the opportunity that says the stage must be prospecting when an opportunity is inserted. So I go back into Salesforce, I go to opportunities, I'm going to create a new one, my op, right? Let's just say it closes today. And let's say I want to do, I'm going to close it. I'm going to do it in closed one. I press save. The stage name must be prospecting when an opportunity is inserted. So that looks like a validation rule. It's actually done via this individual Apex class that we write. And the best part about this is as new functions or as new automation gets introduced into the org, we don't need to go back into the opportunity trigger handler itself. All that we need to do is write a new class that does exactly what we need. And then we come into the custom metadata and we determine how does it, in which order does it execute? Because when we take a look at the S-object trigger setting, we get this nice related list view of all of the actions that are taken in order on our S-objects. I'm going to pause there for a moment. I'm just curious if anybody happens to have any questions about the metadata, the moving parts, the setup that's required.
I have a question. I just noticed the order has the decimal points. Is the idea that if you say instead of reordering everything, you might do 1.5 and 1.6 rather than?
Yeah, so I'll actually get to that in a little bit. That's a good call. The idea is, yeah, if you had everything just in decimal order, then it would be a pain if you ever needed to insert something in the middle because you need to shift all the other ones down. And then there's also a duplicate function to the order itself. And I'll cover that later in the presentation, which I think is pretty neat. So if we wanted to, let's write a new trigger action, right? So let's give our opportunities a default name. So let's create a new Apex class, TA opportunity. Name hello. Whoops, not Jello. Well, let's do name Jello. Why not? That's fun. All right. So what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to paste what I already had. Name Jello.
The Bill Cosby class.
Some pudding pops. So what we're going to do then is private string Jello equals Jello. Right? For all of the opportunities, we're just going to set their name to Jello. Okay, so now I've authored this class. It was pretty simple. The scope of the actions are very small. It's just one action that we're trying to take. And what I'm going to do then is let's push this up to Salesforce, this class. And then we'll go, let's just make sure that that works successfully. All right, that looks like it did. Let's go back into the custom metadata itself. We'll create a new trigger action. And let's get the class name, opportunity name Jello. Opportunity name Jello is the second thing that happens before insert on opportunity. Sets the name to Jello. There we go. So now, again, we didn't need to go back into the opportunity trigger handler and modify it at all. We retain this explicit control over the order of execution via this order itself, and we get this nice user interface that says, the first thing is we're going to make sure that the stage name is not prospecting, and then we'll give it this default name of Jello. So if I go back to this opportunity insert screen, right, I'm going to set this to prospecting. Well, let's just make sure that that check still works, right? So I'm going to say needs analysis, must be prospecting. Okay, so that's still executing. I'm going to go into prospecting and I'm going to press save. Opportunity Jello was created. So the act of extending your triggered logic is no longer a burden to your developers. You no longer need to worry about, is this test class going to run? There's so many different lines that I don't understand, and I just have this one little thing that I need to do. I think that this is a really, really powerful way for folks to write their triggers in the future.
Question?
Sure.
So that's a before insert. What if it's an after insert? Or let's say it's a, well, I guess after insert, you wouldn't be saving anything.
Yeah, you can still, so all of before insert, after insert, all of them still work the same way. So let's create a new trigger action. Opportunity. Oops.
What I'm thinking is if you're factoring out all of these little steps that you can do in an after insert, where do you indicate the save? Like if you were operating on a related record and you had 3 different actions that operated on that related record, do you put the DML in the little factored out operation, or do you have a master one that does that?
Yeah, so that's a good point about if you have multiple actions which then write back to the same parent related record. In that particular case, I would recommend probably using a static list of those parent records, or static map of ID to the new version of that parent record, and then just populate that static map throughout your triggered actions, and then have a final triggered action be to update. So there's some flexibility in here. There's a very similar use cases for if you have multiple triggered actions which need to query for the same records, right? That particular use case, we do have some good documentation for in the repository itself. You scroll down, everything that we're going to be discussing today should be here, just right on the README page, right? So you specify your trigger, you specify your triggered action, stage must be prospecting, you configure your trigger settings, you configure your trigger actions, and then you're good to go. So I'm going to skip over that for just a second. If you take a look, it's all the way down here. There's a section called Avoid Repeated Queries. So basically, we're using the singleton pattern in order to make sure that we only have one object which is getting our queries for us, and then storing those and making those available for later triggered actions. So if you take a look in the image, we execute the queries first, then we do everything else. We could use a similar strategy for holding those pending related record updates in memory before executing them as perhaps the final action for the given context.
Okay. So each one of these classes sort of becomes like a factored method, and you're passing a record back and forth until you get to the end, and then it gets saved. Something like that.
Yeah, that's very particular for if you have multiple updates to the same parent related record.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Most of these things that we won't really need to do that for. But like, for example, on opportunity, updating the parent account, right? Like you got to recategorize the account based on the opportunity value or whatever it is. You might need to also, besides just modifying the account category, you might need to also modify, I don't know, its region or its total value. Maybe there's a roll up of all open opportunities that are the total value of the opportunity of the account. So that particular thing, yeah, little bit niche. Most of the time you should be covered without it, but
Cool.
There is a way to do it.
So originally when I was seeing this, and I'm not really a developer yet, I was thinking, oh, a lot of little classes, that's going to be harder to understand what's going on. So is the intention that the descriptions make it easy to guide you through what each class is doing so that you don't have to dig through code as much? Because
Yes. So the intention is that the descriptions combined with this in order related list should make it very, very visible to even a manager or a new team member or anybody. You shouldn't have to reverse engineer code at all. There is another part of this. There's another part of this which I think is really, really interesting. If you take a look at the way that we're writing these classes, right, we're passing in a list of objects to the method call itself. Included in the trigger framework itself is a class called the test utility. And the test utility just includes a method which will, you give it an S-object type, and it will give you back a syntactically correct ID for that given S-object type. So you could give it like schema dot, S-object dot account, and it would give you back a fake account ID, right? Well, we can use the test utility plus the fact that we're passing in our records to perform DML tests, to perform tests without actually inserting the records themselves. So if we take a look at the stage change rules, this just means, hey, if I'm in prospecting, I could go to qualification or lost. So it just enforces that the stages must go through the right order. So for every opportunity, if you go out of order, then we're going to add an error to the opportunity. Okay, that's very similar to what we just did for the prospecting. But take a look at how we write the test class for it. This is pretty interesting. So what we do here is, because we pass in the new list and the old list to the method call itself, we can generate a syntactically correct fake record ID and use that record ID to say, okay, here's the old version of the record. It was in qualification, and the new version of the record with this ID is in closed one. You can then test your logic without actually having to insert the record at all, or update the record in this case. Here we're just calling the before update method, then we're just making sure that the element in position 1 has an error. It has exactly one error, and the error that we get, the message is the invalid stage change error from qualification to closed one.
Mitch, is that a performance gain?
This is a big time performance gain, especially when it comes to going live on deployments. So on deployments, right, you have to run all of your local tests. This can make your test run in a fraction of the time, especially if you're in an old legacy org that has had some consultants in there that have been using multiple different process builders, different automation strategies themselves. This will just allow you to test exactly your logic and nothing else.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
How does this play with configuration? So you'd be able to pass your code coverage, but when you actually get into production, it won't behave like you think it will because you're not actually testing to the database?
Not necessarily. So that's a good point, right? This is a pure unit test itself. Purely you're testing the before update method itself. You then have to have an additional layer, which would be your functional test where you actually insert the record. So we want to do multiple unit tests and run unit tests because they're cheap to execute and to construct. But then, if you insert records on every single unit test, that bogs down your system time for deployments. So you want to make sure that you only insert records explicitly in a functional test. And you know, the pyramid of tests is many unit tests, slightly less functional tests, less end-to-end tests. Cool. There are a couple of other things that I think are really neat about this. One thing I don't know if anybody noticed is I'm going to go into the opportunity insert rules metadata that we have. And we've got this checkbox to bypass the execution. So right now I could click this and bypass the execution of the insert rules, which would then allow me to insert an opportunity that is not that is not in prospecting. So you don't need to modify code in order to bypass execution of your triggered actions. You can just do it directly from the metadata itself. You can do these bypasses at the individual object level like we just did. You see, we didn't prevent it from being inserted because the stage name wasn't prospecting, but the name still got defaulted to Jello. So you can pick and choose which individual actions we want to enable or disable, or you can do it at the S object level itself. There's a bypass execution at the S object setting level itself. There's also another way in which you can bypass, right? So I could go, let's go back, and I'm gonna set this one back to active, no longer being bypassed. Okay, and then I'm gonna copy this class name. I'm gonna go and I'll open up Dev Console. Let's create an opportunity. Okay, let's give it a name. All right, let's give it a close date. All right, and let's give it, let's put it in qualification. All right, let's give it the stage name of qualification. All right, so if I try to, this should fail because we're inserting it and it's not in prospecting. Stage name must be prospecting when an opportunity is inserted. But we can bypass via Apex itself. So notice that this is still active, right? If we take a look, this bypass execution is marked false. But I can say metadata trigger handler. Metadata trigger handler dot bypass the action name itself, right? So now I can successfully insert the opportunity. And that's really helpful for scenarios where you have to encode that logic into Apex and you just want it for one particular scenario. You don't want to, say, turn it off until it gets turned back on. You just want to bypass it for that one individual transaction. So these Apex-based bypasses, they're static, which means that they'll last until the end of the transaction. You can also do trigger-based bypass opportunity, right? And that should bypass everything on the opportunity itself. So let's see what the name is.
I bet it's not Jello.
Take a look at our log. Our name is Hello World. So you can bypass at the from the setup menu, just using checkboxes, those will stay bypassed until you uncheck them. You can bypass from Apex, right? And that'll stay bypassed until the transaction is complete. There is a third way in which you can bypass. I won't demo it, but on the S-object trigger setting themselves and the triggered actions, there are these two things: required permission and bypass permission. What you can do here is enter in the API name of a custom permission. Then if the running user has that permission, let's just say you enter it into bypass. If the running user has that permission, execution will be bypassed for that user. If you enter it into required, then it will only execute if they have it. So it'll be bypassed for everybody else. So the required is super helpful for if you're trying to beta test new features. You can just write your triggered action, deploy it up to prod, and then have a required permission on it, and then just assign via permission set assign a permission set to your beta test users. Let them have at it. And then if you want to take it one step further, let's just say you have a feature request that requires modification of trigger action from version 1 to version 2. What you do is you set the bypass permission on version 1 to be the same as the required permission on version 2. So that way, then they don't execute version 1, they only execute version 2. And then when it comes time that version 2 becomes live, you either bypass via checkbox or delete the trigger action metadata itself for version 1, and then remove the required permission on version 2. So it's almost foolproof for beta testing new features, which is not something that we've really in the Salesforce world had the ability to do for our users in the past.
Is that documented somewhere, Mitch? Because that's really important DevOps stuff.
Yeah, so that is documented in here that we take a look.
Awesome.
There's multiple different bypass mechanisms. You can bypass from the setup menu, right?
Yeah.
You can bypass from Apex, and then you can bypass execution with these permissions.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So, and the coolest part about it is you don't need to write your logic such that it checks for the feature, it checks for the permission itself. You don't need to, wrap all of your logic in a if feature management has permission or whatever it is that class, that method call. You don't need to do that anymore. By encapsulating it into this trigger action itself, you gain that flexibility to just specify what that permission name is here, and then you can leave your logic alone. All right, now there are two other things that I want to show you. One of them I think is super cool. Okay, so when I started going down the rabbit hole of authoring this Apex trigger action framework, I thought, okay, I don't like that I have to modify, the one trigger handler to rule them all, which just becomes this, unmaintainable class. I thought, okay, maybe we should split out our triggered actions themselves. But then I got an idea from a former colleague of mine. He said, I wonder if you could make this work with flows. So I'd like to show you something. We have all of this is covered within the README itself, but the trigger action framework will also help you to bridge that gap between your developers and your administrators by allowing you to write flows and then control the order of execution of your flows amongst your Apex themselves. So let's go through just one quick example of what that would look like. So
it would look awesome is what it would look like.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you guys a quick demo. So in order to do this, you need to write the flows in a particular way. But then once you pick up on it, it should make sense. It might be a little bit of a gap from an admin who's doing a flow, because with these, we're actually working with collections of records instead of an individual record. So you create the flow as an auto-launched flow, right? I'm gonna go free form on this one. And we're gonna need to add some resources, right? So I'm going to say, I'm gonna have a new variable, and it needs to be called new list, right? And it is a collection of records, and then you pass in whatever type you want. So I'm gonna say opportunity, that's available for insert. Okay, so that's one of the elements. Now I'm gonna do another one. So another variable called, let's just say, this one is old list, right? It is a collection of records and they are opportunities, right? Let's just say that's available for input. Now, if we want to write back to the record before it hits the database, so if we want to be in the before insert or before update context, we can also do that, but we need to create another variable called new list after flow. Okay, that is a record collection of opportunities, and this has got to be available for output. So all of the definition of all of these different flow variables is specified directly here within the README. So you don't need to remember it. Should be there for you. You can read it in the future. But we write this flow kind of like we write a trigger, right? So let's loop over all records, right? For all records that are in the new list, right? Let's give them a default name of goodbye. Okay, so the current record's name equals a new resource, which is a constant called goodbye, right? And its data type is text and its value is goodbye. Okay. So for all records, we set them to goodbye. Now we just add them back to the new list after we've done the flow. So this should always be the final step in your for loop of all records. So add to new list after flow. So we're going to say new list after flow. We're going to add the current item. Okay. There we go. So what we're doing now is we say, after we've assigned it, we send it back to the new list after flow, and then we complete our loop. So this flow is just going to set the opportunity's name to goodbye. Okay. I'm going to press save. I'm going to say goodbye flow. Copy that name. I'll save it. It's going to be saved, but it's not yet active. So let's activate it. Okay, cool. So now we've created this goodbye flow. I'm going to go back into Salesforce, or I'm going to go back into the setup menu, go into custom metadata. Custom metadata types. Let's create a new trigger action. I'm going to call this the goodbye flow. Now you set the API name of the flow in the flow name, right? And let's just say that's the third thing that happens before insert on opportunity. Okay. Sets name to goodbye. Okay. Now the Apex class name itself, if we just put in some bogus class name, we've got a validation rule that says the name must equal trigger action flow if the name is populated. So you save yourself from making a mistake right there, but you just put in trigger action flow, pass in the API name of the flow itself, press save. So now on opportunity, we do three things, right? We prevent it from being inserted if its stage is not prospecting. We set the name to Jello, and then we set it to goodbye. So if I insert an opportunity, its name should be goodbye. Let's create a new opportunity. Test, boom. Let's try it in perception analysis. This should fail. Stage name must be prospecting. Okay, I'm going to put it into prospecting. Should be set to Jello. Now it's set to goodbye. So you can write your flows and bridge that gap, still maintain your single injection point, so you have complete control over the order of execution for all automations in your org. So some things where this is super, super helpful, right? Like, for example, let's just say you have a very, very big Service Cloud implementation and you have a lot of cases and you're sending a lot of emails to them. Well, You don't want to use Apex to send the emails because there's limits on that, right? You have, I don't know, what is it, 5,000 or something like that unique email recipients per day. But if you have more than that of cases, if you have a large volume of cases, that might not be enough. You can use a flow to then bridge that gap between the declarative side and the programmatic side and check and do an outbound, do a regular old workflow email alert for all records within the flow itself. There is one more thing I want to show you as well. So I'm going to create a new flow. There is, so auto launch flow is cool, but it kind of stinks because like there is no access to the is changed or prior value. So let's create a new flow and let's just set the, we're going to do this flow. And what we'll do is we'll just set the default description if the stage changes. So a new freeform flow, we'll go to the manager, we'll create our variables that we need, right? New list, which is a record collection of opportunities that is available for input, right? We've got old list. By the way, the old list is not required before insert. So I didn't need to do that on the previous one, but it is required before update. So anytime that, because the old list is not available to you in the before insert context. So it's not required for that flow, but that previous flow that we just did. Old list is a collection of records of opportunities, right? This is available for input. We're done. Now we're going to create that new list after flow, right? Variable. New list after flow. It's a record collection of opportunities and it's available for output. Now, there's something that's very cool in this. When we define the new list and the old list record variables, the trigger action framework itself will automatically populate those with the values that are in trigger.new and trigger.old. And then we can write an Apex action to fetch the old value from the old list for your current record that you're on. So let's write another flow for each record that's in the new list. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create another resource. Let's call it, it's a variable that is the old record, right? Its data type is a record and it's not a collection. It's just a single opportunity and it doesn't need to be available for input or output, right? So now we have a variable that we can hold the old record value in, right? So let's take an action, right? We'll go to Apex actions. Now I haven't given this a good label, so my apologies. In the future, there'll probably be a more human readable label, but in the trigger action flow, there's one for get old record. Get old record, right? So what's the current record that we're on? What is the type of the current record? Well, it's going to be an opportunity. The type for the old list is opportunity, and the type for the output is opportunity, right? The input value, what's the current record? That's going to be the record that we're on within the loop, right? And the old list is the old list itself. Now we go back down to advanced and we manually assign the results of this Apex action to our old record. Okay. Now we have our old record, right? So there's no need to use like is changed or prior value or any of that. We have a valid workaround to fetch that information, even though we're in an auto launch flow. So now we'll make a decision, right? We have the old record. Did stage change? Right? So if the stage changed, right? So we're going to say if the old records not get old record, if the old record's stage name does not equal the current record's stage name. So now we know that the stage name was changed, right? If that happened, set default description. Right, so we'll say the current records description equals, we'll create a new constant, call it the description, it's text, right? And the value is going to be Austin developers are super cool. All right, so for every record, if we change the stage, we're going to set the description to this value. So if the stage is changed, we're going to set that. Now the final step, like I said, for all of these ones where we're doing them before insert or update, we need to add to new list. Add to new list after the flow is complete. All right, so new list after flow, we're going to add the current item. Done. So what are we doing here? For every item, we get the old version. We then compare the old version stage to the new version stage. If it changed, we set a default description. After that default description is set, we add that record back to the new list, and then we go back here. We also need to do that in case it's not set. Okay. So we've got this flow. Let's press save. We'll call it, I don't know, op description. Okay, copy the flow API name. I'll save it. I'll activate it. All right, now let's go back to our custom metadata types. Let's create a new triggered action. All right, it's going to be the op description. Trigger action flow. It's going to be the first thing that happens after update on opportunity. Sets the default description if the stage changes. All right, so now we take a look back at our opportunity. We get this global view of everything that's going on. Okay, so here's all of our stuff before insert. Here's our stuff before update, right? So let's go back to, I don't know, our goodbye opportunity, right? If we take a look at the details, let's give it a description. All right, where's the description? It's right here. I'll save it. Okay, so it's got the description. If I move it directly to proposal issued, there we go. Change the stage name and the description gets automatically updated for us. So that is how we can really bridge that gap between our admin users and our developers while retaining that single injection point. Single injection point means complete control over the order of execution. Now we know that our flows aren't going to operate before our triggers and our triggers aren't going to operate before our flows. We control that. The platform doesn't control that for us now.
Is now the time to applaud?
That is outstanding. You have directly addressed one of my biggest pet peeves about working in an org that has a lot of flows and a lot of code.
Yep.
So this stuff is all pretty new. We just have recently started using it on our team. And it does require a little bit of training just because, like I said, you're working on a flow that is a collection of records, not just an individual record. But if you're careful, you can use that Apex action to get the old version of the record, then you're golden pretty much.
This can all be bundled into a change set and moved from tier to tier, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Any performance issues? Any things that gotchas watch out for? Don't step in that.
The only thing that we've actually done a lot of work to make the performance as minimal as possible. We do that by only querying the metadata that is for the context that we're in. We cache the query results. We cache the permissions of the user. So all of those checks are only made one time. Typically, in order to just query and fetch the actions that are configured, it's about an 8 to 12 millisecond runtime. So we're not talking a very large overhead at all on this. And that was something I was very, very worried about when I first created this framework. But you can do, like, when I stress tested this, I was able to do 1,000 actions in a given context in less than 3 seconds. I wasn't actually like performing any DML on those actions, but I was just looping through the records, dynamically instantiating all of the classes, less than 3 seconds. That was in a Scratch org, which has, you know, suboptimal performance. So we're talking thousands of actions on a given context, and it should be able to handle it no problem. At that point, then you're probably going to be running into like query errors or maybe multiple DML statements, which would then require you to take a look at the documentation for avoiding repeated queries. So I definitely would make sure you take a look at this.
Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you implied that you wanted to partition your functional test from your unit test. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's typically not standard operating procedure.
So if you take a look at the test pyramid, let me see here.
I like it from a theoretical standpoint. I'm just worried about, you know, I've got young developers that we have to mentor, and it's guiding them down this path of really doing not good work but great work and making our clients very happy. And performance is really, we pound into their heads about, you know, following the standard practices. And this is just one more that I think that's really, really important for them to understand.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, to be honest with you, I've spoken to Chris Peterson, who's the director of product management at Apex at Salesforce. And, you know, overall, they're really trying to instill more of a pure engineering unit test driven functionality kind of mindset within the ecosystem itself. So that's why they've exposed things like, for example, this .get errors method, right? So that way you don't need to perform your DML insert. So I think that this might be something that will be talked about in the ecosystem over the next coming years when it comes to like different levels of engineering maturity, because, you know, like we all have worked with developers who are like, well, the code is covered, right? I was like, code coverage is not what you're looking for, right? We want logic coverage. We want robust, repeatable, isolated unit tests that will run the same no matter if there's data in the system or if there's no data in the system. They should be telling you exactly what's failing. So in order to have that robust suite of unit tests, you have to keep their scope super minimal so they can be executed really fast. And you want to avoid hitting the database at all costs, basically, for pure unit test.
That's a great point. A lot of the DevOps third-party tools like GearSet that completely ignores that differentiation. They just look at overall coverage, and if you're not at 85%, then it fails, just straight up. So, you know, the industry is, especially the Salesforce. I come from the Java world of 20 years of very complex software engineering, and, you know, Salesforce, what I love about it, it's like the Wild Wild West. There's a lot of opportunity for consultants to ride in on the horse, you know, in your white shining armor and save the day, because you can bring to the table some practices that increase performance, increase readability, maintainability. And this is just yet another one of the arrows in the quiver that the consultants can if they can learn this and speak to it and use this as a very important tool. I think this is when I saw this the first time you did this, I was like, I couldn't sleep because I was like so excited. But this is I know it's a geek thing, but
I
Yeah,
can I hear you.
I'm
Okay.
laughing because I've been there.
okay.
Yeah, hey man, whatever helps.
Yeah.
That and tequila.
Well, and I will say, as someone who generally, recently, I've generally been one of the people working with consultants, like that we hire consultants to help us do, things with a lot of code. And the idea of being able to really, get the best performance out of it that's like the next level that I expect and want out of the consultants, right? Like it's, having a regular developer, like they can do code that makes it work and makes things happen. But then when you have, the volume and the stress on the system that causes these performance issues, and you start getting apex errors all over the place, I love that you can really try to get the best performance out of the system using this framework. I think that's awesome.
It goes back to the old adage of cheap, fast, and good. Pick two of the three.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mark, interestingly enough, you've never been in, our physical office since you joined after COVID hit, but we did used to have that sign up on the back of the wall.
Yeah.
There's one final thing that I want to talk about, and we already kind of touched about it. Is somebody had a really P9 with this order prefix. When you partition your trigger logic like this, right? You can really work together in teams. One thing I would definitely recommend you take a look at is the SFDX project JSON file within your Salesforce's source repository. And what this does is it specifies, hey, these are the applicable directories within my project that can contain stuff that will be deployed to Salesforce. So for example, you could have like base opportunity like your base stuff. So stuff that happens, like utilities, trigger frameworks, anything that's kind of core that's shared across everything. Then you can have like your opportunity automation that might be shared across all opportunities. So like all opportunities cannot be inserted unless they're in prospect, right? But then you might have a retail team that has logic that's specific to record types or the whole, where the record type, their logic is specific to opportunities where the record type equals retail. And then they can put their stuff in their own package directory. And then the wholesale team can have their own separate package directory, and they'll never step on each other's code ever. So I definitely would recommend taking a look at the SFDX project JSON structure itself. You'll also be setting yourself up for a lot of future success as second generation packaging comes around, because the more granular you can get these tiny little packages, then when you do your deployment command with SFDX package install in the future, it'll check to see, does this package match the version that's in the org? And if so, it'll do nothing. So you'll only be deploying the packages for which you have a delta in them, which can drastically.
Is this an alternative to change sets?
What was that?
I think the three methods of deploying code is change sets, a blank org, and finally packaging. Is that what this?
So there's multiple methods that I think there's 7 methods actually for you to deploy.
7. Oh my gosh.
Change sets, metadata API, Salesforce command line interface, Ant migration tool, workbench, and I think that I'm missing one right there.
Okay.
But there are multiple different ways for you to deploy code. If you haven't taken a look at like getting onto a CI/CD platform like Jenkins, or using like GitHub Actions to automate your deployments, I definitely would recommend that. Can save you a whole bunch of time. And then, Nadina and Justin, like maybe we should have another discussion about that itself, because that's a really, really big topic.
Yeah, I've experienced Jenkins before. It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. So if you are able to take your application now, because you don't have this shared file, there's no longer like one opportunity trigger handler, right? So you can partition it and put the logic in the directory that makes sense for your long-term application's success, right? as an architect, right, your main objective is to identify and partition your application's functionality. This is an incredibly powerful tool to have in your tool set if you're in charge of a complex org. If you do this, right, then you can use the order in a nice way where you basically have the stuff that's to the left-hand side of the decimal be your team prefix, and then the stuff that's to the right-hand side be the actual order of execution. So you could say, hey, retail team, your prefix is 2, wholesale team, your prefix is 3, and then they just specify what is the order amongst each other. So there's a lot of flexibility in here beyond just like, oh, I can slot this in now and I don't need to reshuffle everything. If you use this with the order prefix, this might be a strategy that can really help you to make sure that your code is executing in the right order and your teams are happy and they have control over their own execution. So for example, right, we could have some things that are shared with order prefix 1, and then we could have like wholesale is prefix 2, retail is prefix 3, right? This isn't like a hard and fast rule. This is just something that could be used in the future. So if you do end up using this framework and you have some learnings from using the order prefix, the order as a prefix, let me know. I'd love to hear more about your experiences. But with that is my presentation. I want to say thank you guys for coming by today. I'm super excited to share this framework with the world. I think it's going to save us as Salesforce developers a whole lot of time. So I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts or questions, but I just want to mostly say thank you.
It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you explained it very well. I mean, this is pretty complex stuff, and you laid it out very clear. I think, especially with all of the investment that Salesforce is putting into flows, one of the really most elegant parts about it is the sort of seamless integration between code and putting stuff in flows. So thank you for that.
Yeah, actually, Melissa, she was saying like partition your metadata logic using, your trigger logic using metadata. Say that 5 times fast. I actually think I'm going to change the name of this presentation to orchestrate all of your Salesforce automation using the trigger action framework.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
How about trigger execution nirvana?
Yeah, trigger execution nirvana. Yeah, that's quite the phrase. But honestly, when I thought that this was possible and I basically put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard and made it happen, that's exactly what I felt. I was like, this is going to save so many people so many hours. So I'm really excited to share it. And I had started working on this project right as I joined Google. And Google has very strict rules about what employees can do in the open source world, right? For example, I can't just create a GitHub private repository, even a private one. I need to get formal approval. So I went through the right processes. So if you do use this, I would just definitely say, save your company a bunch of headache. Just make sure that you use the license file that's included, right? You just need to import this into your org, into your source, and you're good, just for legal compliance. But everything is all good to go.
And
Mitch,
does Google use this?
What inspired you to do this?
Well, so I've been working in Salesforce since 2013, right? And writing a trigger is probably one of the most important things you do as a Salesforce developer. And I just thought to myself, it seems silly that we always have to modify our code instead of extending our code, right? Solid principles. We want single responsibility for all of our classes. We want the open close principle, which means that our code is open to be extending, but closed to open to be extended, but closed for modification, right? The Liskov substitution principle, it means you can swap out a lower class for a higher class. And then the dependency inversion principle means that you use basically child class could be substituted for a parent class, and then the interface segregation principle means separate your public methods via interfaces and only specify the interface that's necessary. I
This
just
sounds
thought,
very familiar.
yeah, it's a solid application design. This is something that's like, you know, it's been around in like pure object oriented programming for a long
What's the
time.
guy's name that came up with that list? Oh my gosh, what's his name? Yeah, those are great principles, especially the
And
solid.
I just,
That's right.
Yeah.
Solid. Yeah.
yep. So
Yeah, Bob Martin.
yeah. So I just,
Robert Martin.
like I said, you know, I've been writing Apex since 2013, and I just realized that the way that triggers are written on the platform, it just flies right in the face of solid principles. So I wanted to make a more architecturally sound way for folks to write their triggers and not step on each other's toes. We've all been in orgs where there's multiple developers, and you know, if you have one file that needs to be shared responsibility across everybody, it gets really difficult to maintain that file. So
Mark mentioned it earlier. We just came away from a client that had that exact situation. A single trigger that encapsulated probably, I don't know, Mark, what would you say, like most of their licensing across?
Yeah, it was 9
multiple
functional
program
areas for, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a ridiculous amount of code directly in the trigger class. 1,500 lines, give or take. And even worse, the test class that was associated with it didn't even provide minimum coverage for the lines. And you can forget about testing like the functional areas if there were any in this trigger class. Seeing a presentation like this, it's, it would have been very, very handy to see this ahead of the presentation I gave to the client about how they could refactor and improve that trigger by essentially segmenting out all of the different areas of functionality into concrete classes. So let's say you have a particular record that has some very unique like business logic around just that program area that the record represents. You can put that in its own class and not have to worry about other areas of functionality. Whether or not they actually go ahead and do that, I'm not sure if they will, but something like this would have been very handy to see.
Some people say, I think it was Mark said, like when you first saw this, like you couldn't sleep at night. Like, me either, man. Like I was up many late nights just plugging away at this, and I was like, this is gonna work, And when I saw that it did, I thought, okay, I need to like take some time, formally make this, usable, readable, understandable, distributable. Make sure I'm doing it correctly so I don't get in trouble with my employer. Because this is too good to keep to myself, and I just want to share with everybody. So,
and for everybody else on the other end of the internet, this is a game changer. This is a differentiator for you to put on your CV or to bring into your own practice. It could it's just one of those tools that I think that's imperative for success, especially company I work for, we're going into integrations with ERPs to Salesforce, and those are behemoths and monoliths, and making sure that performance is top of the heap for consideration of anything we do is paramount to our success. Because they come to us for solutions. Anyway, great job, Mitch. Really proud of you. This is awesome stuff.
Agreed.
Yeah. Does anybody have anybody want to peek under the hood? Anybody want to see how this actually works?
Sure.
I would be curious how you're controlling the flow order there, if you would show that. But excellent presentation. I did want to comment that for those of you interested in second generation packages or unlock packages, we've For example, I've been going through that over the last year, essentially, and splitting an org into various packages. And you need to adopt frameworks like this that are metadata controlled so you can separate your functionality correctly. And this is a great presentation. You have some good ideas for stuff that we have not implemented in ours. So really appreciate it. It was nice.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So the easiest thing to cover is the trigger action class. Trigger action class just contains all these inner classes that are the interfaces that we need, right? So that's pretty easy. The trigger base is what actually does all of the kind of basic logic that you would expect a trigger to do. So for example, we populate a set of IDs that we process before and after update. So that way that can be referenced in other classes. So we go to here, prevent recursion, right? Let me blow this up a little bit, right? For all of the opportunities that are in the new list, if they have not yet been processed after update, then add them to a list of opportunities to be updated and then do whatever you need to do, right? So the trigger base does that. It checks to see if we're valid. Then it just basically, you know, it tries to call the context specific method. If there's something that goes wrong, it will catch and use the object add error to, you know, gracefully handle what would otherwise be unhandled exceptions within your trigger. All right. So this is like the main body of it. This is like the run method of the trigger handler itself. Some things for interacting with the bypass S object names. So bypass, clear the bypass, is bypassed, or clear all bypasses. Validate run. Just make sure that we're not doing things that have been bypassed. Then we get the S object name and the context, right? So that's the trigger base itself. That does like the dispatching of the trigger. But the metadata trigger handler is where the real magic happens, right? So again, we've got like, you know, some static instantiation, but for every context, what we're gonna do is for every trigger action before insert that's in the actions that we need, we're gonna call its before insert method. So what this means is, okay, let's take a look at what does it mean to be a before insert action. So what I'm gonna do then is, I am going to basically query for metadata, right? And then I'm going to take that metadata and I'm going to use the type for name from its Apex class to create a new instance of that. So this Apex class name is what you see when you're in the custom metadata itself. So we're creating an instance of whatever class we define here at this point in the metadata, okay? And so that's how we instantiate these objects, and then we cast them to the correct interface that they are. To query for them, we have a dynamic query that just queries all of the stuff that's necessary from the trigger action metadata type itself. We query these in order, right? The framework also has support for installed packages as well. So you can, if you go to, for example, the object type, you can specify its namespace. So if you have some third-party package and you want to write a trigger on the third-party S object itself, you have the ability to do it with this framework. But basically, that's how we do it, right? So we make this query, right? When we do the query, we also check the permissions, right? So we fetch those permission names and we say, okay, does the user actually have that permission? And if they do, then we'll determine the flow using that. Then we call them, we have them in order, right? They're instantiated and cast to the right interface as defined in trigger action, right? So before insert, whatever it is. And then we just call that actions or that context method itself. So
how are you making sure that flow is only called one time though? I think I'm missing that.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the trigger action flow. So flow, right now it's hard coded to not allow recursive flows. Whoops. So here's the trigger action flow class, right? So the trigger action flow is just a trigger action itself.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Yep. And what we do then, so this is get old record. This is how we find that older record itself. That's the invocable method. But for the flow itself, what we're going to do is before, let's go like this. Let's go before update. We check which IDs we've already processed. And if we haven't yet processed that record, then we're going to put it into the flow and kick the flow off. So this trigger base.IDs processed before or after update stores all of the IDs that have basically been through the trigger framework before in this transaction. So we can use this to avoid recursion, or in this case, hard code in that we are avoiding recursion for all triggered actions. In the future, I'd like to have an advanced like checkbox, which will allow you to, on the trigger action itself, if you set it up as a flow, allow you to have that flow execute recursively. That's available to you right now in like standard flow or standard process builder, but not in this quite yet. But that's a future enhancement, which I'd like to make.
Very clever.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So trigger base does all of the normal trigger dispatching stuff, checking the context, determining the trigger.new, if before update, then call before update. If after update, then call after update. All that stuff's done via trigger base. Trigger handler, metadata trigger handler extends the trigger base itself, right? So it does all of that stuff as well, but then it also does this cool stuff of dynamically fetching from metadata those Apex class names, instantiating instances of those objects, casting them to the correct interface, and then calling the methods that are defined for that interface in the order specified in the metadata.
Hey, Mitch.
Hmm.
What about DLRS?
So if you wanted, so the DLRS has it's got like that one-liner method, right? And you're supposed to put it in your trigger somewhere, right?
Well, no, it creates triggers for you. It runs its own triggers on
Yeah.
the same objects that you're running stuff on.
Yeah, so with DLRS, they also have that advanced ability for where they have that one-liner method where you can plug it into your other triggers.
Oh, is
So
that
I
right?
would
Okay.
Yeah, I would recommend doing that. So avoid their triggers, write your own using this, and then just call their method within that as a trigger action itself.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Cool. Well, if you, I'm really, like I said, I'm super excited to share this with the world. So if you want to go and take a look at the repository, raise an issue, I'm only a tweet or an email or an issue away from helping to resolve it or helping to make it better. If you got ideas about how this could be better as well, please let me know. I'm really looking forward to how this can be used within the
Be
web.
careful what you ask for. No. It's a great job, Mitch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
This really is one of the most impressive things I've seen at Trailhead DX or at Dreamforce or anywhere. This is really awesome.
I'm hoping next Dreamforce, goodness knows when it's going to happen, but I think I'm going to be trying to present this at the next Dreamforce. So
I believe you should.
Yeah.
Sessions. This is a pre-event workshop.
yeah, you guys get the sneak peek. You guys are the beta testers, right?
We can say we knew him when.
That's right.
Yeah, really.
Remember us when you're famous.
Yes.
I always joke with my girlfriend, like, oh, people are going to see me like, oh my gosh, that's the guy who wrote the Apex trigger action framework. And she just laughs and tells me it's a lie. But I swear it'll be true someday.
I mean, you think about DLRS, which was revolutionary when Andy Fawcett wrote that, and and then Salesforce hired him to like run all of whatever his position is way high up. So, you may get a call from Salesforce. This is pretty damn impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Golden Hoodie Award waiting. Yeah, that's a good
Maybe
idea.
someday. Maybe someday. That'd be pretty neat. I'd be very flattered.
We need anyway, yeah, we need like a developer specific award for sure. I think this would win it.
MVP. Let's get him as an MVP.
There you go. Just good. MVP's good enough. I'll take that, right?
I'd settle for a cookie at this point.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again, Mitch. That was awesome. As you know, everyone here loves it. We've had a lot of, there's a lot of chat. I actually got kicked out of this meeting for a minute. My internet must have crashed. But I think it kept recording because I'm recording to the cloud. So that'll be fine. I will post this tomorrow to the user group in the Salesforce community. So I put a link to that. If you don't already belong, you'll be able to find it there. Any other questions before we say goodnight or any other comments?
When's the next meeting, Melissa? April, right?
We'll figure something out for April. Yes, we are taking off
Okay.
March, but we will do something in April. And like I said, we'll keep doing Twitter and other ways of getting the word out once we get that figured out. So
Okay.
yeah. So thanks so much for coming, everyone. This is a great turnout. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for having
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah.